The following podcast contains politics, leftist politics, the whole truth, justice, and the American way thing. We live in a world where one has to post this. Progress is a dirty word, such as science and reason. My superheroes would weep. Also, this podcast contains naughty language, so please be advised. The comment section has also been deactivated because this is a broadcast, not a conversation. Hey everybody, welcome. This is DC Domingo, and we're going to bring you another very lengthy podcast. I like to bring as much content as I can, quite simply because I like to talk, especially when it comes to matters of things I love, like DC. It has been a really busy couple of weeks. Luckily for us, there hasn't been a giant attack against DC Comics or DC movies in general. One of the nicest things we have now that Wonder Woman is quite the sensation is that most of the negative press has kind of taken a little break from bashing us. And that's always welcome. So we don't have a section of we're gonna throw away the trash. We always had one of those sections where we basically took on the biased loud mouths from the internet and the YouTube haters and people on Twitter who want to cry out for attention. We don't have that in this podcast, and it's quite refreshing. We're gonna save that for the content, and we're gonna have a couple of segments. The first segment is simply in the news. We're gonna have a cool picture of Clark Kent, because we like Clark Kent and reporting. Part 2, I'm gonna talk about 3 documentaries. The Bill Finger documentary on Hulu. Also, before Wonder Woman came out, there was a 2-parter Superheroes Decoded by the History Channel. And then there's one that I didn't really want to talk about, but, kind of merits mentioning, since the guy who made it is now employed by Collider. And also, shout out to Collider for firing John Campea. Thank you. But, they're still kind of shabby. Very shady. It's the doc called Superman Lives, which I guess if you have Showtime, it's airing there. While I was doing my research, that's where it came up. And that's part 2 of our podcast. Part 3, it's going to be looking into one of my favorite short series, The Button, which, other people have already reviewed and whatnot, but I would like to get my take on it. And going through my old issues of before Watchmen, there isn't much related to The Button. I think most of that will be covered by me when the when the Watchmen join the DC universe. So I kind of just kind of skimmed through it and stuff. I did see some pretty cool hints from the comic books featuring Dr. Manhattan and Adrian Veidt, So am I going to hold on to those? I might share some screen caps with you guys. They might tie into, to future issues. So that's going to be our podcast today. And one of the cool things that I'm going to start doing is if there is like some kind of image or a lot of writing on some kind of picture that I have, I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud, because I've been told that some people listen to this podcast while they're on the way to work. I'm also going to try to get this on iTunes, just because I hope that with the Justice League there's more people tuning in to DC content material, especially for smaller channels. Alright, so we're going to get into part 1 in the news. If you are a fun person like me, see, I like DC Comics, and I don't really care for Marvel movies. It's been a long time since I've actually cared for one. I don't keep up with it. Um, a friend of mine said, if I give you $1 million, would you watch a Marvel movie? And I was like, well, that seems like prostitution. Paying for some services rendered is not my ideal place to be in life. So that's what I responded to my friend, and I don't really keep up with it. Yesterday, apparently Saturday, the 15th, there was a Disney Expo, and oddly enough, Marvel showcased a bunch of footage from the Infinity movie with the Avengers, and I find it interesting because Comic-Con is like a week away. Why would you take away comic book aficionados the opportunity to enjoy that trailer? I do believe it's kind of shameful to be like, hey, you like Comic-Con? Well, too bad, we're gonna make you come to this Disney event. And they showcased their timeline of movies and stuff like that. I had a wonderful date with my girlfriend, and I didn't pay attention to it until I came back. And apparently there were some people on Twitter who were not happy and were giving the Marvel fans a run for their money. Clearly, I don't really understand that. If you don't like Marvel, just don't. You just don't like it. You don't have to go to their page and trash talk them. I think that that gives validity to the work they're not really doing, in my opinion. And quite frankly, that's not who we are as fans. One of the reasons with the increase of popularity, regarding DC Comics with the success of Wonder Woman, is that we do have more people coming into our camp. I'm not saying that the people who are mean or posers or brand new fans, since Wonder Woman is now a hit, but it is quite suspicious that was pointed out. I've had some podcasts where I post the so-called outrage against DC Comics, and there was only like 5 people on Twitter. So 5 angry people on Twitter equated to people are mad at DC Comics for the right reasons, when it was just 5 angry people. But apparently there were some angry DC fans against Marvel Infinity, and I'm not part of it. So it's never okay to hate on things you don't like, but I do find it kind of unusual that a lot of people who are pointing out this hatred are not really calling out on journalists and people on Twitter who were really mean to a lot of DC fans, myself included, or even actors and actresses or movie directors. I don't need to point out any specifics, but you've seen it. Look at my back catalog of podcasts; they're all accounted there. So I'm not really surprised that several years of torment against DC Comics resulted in an angry backlash when Infinity happened, because we've been experiencing trolling, not only from fans but from the media itself. It's not justified, but since the media didn't seem to call out angry Marvel people because they were the angry Marvel people, it kind of seems hypocritical to call out on angry DC fans. Again, hatred is hatred. I don't condone it, but the media needs to be held accountable. You can't hate on DC Comics all this time and then complain when a few DC Comics people make fun of Marvel. Again, it should not be double standard. We should not tolerate any kind of hatred at all. But I do dislike the selective noticing of these events. Ideally, geeks, like what you like. I've always been a proponent of, real fans celebrate, fake fans deteriorate, the franchise with a lot of hatred and stuff. So, Yeah, that's not my thing. So that's what I'm saying. Don't hate on Marvel. Do what I do. Zero. Unless, Marvel says something negative, then reply. Whatever, hugs or whatever you want, man. It's up to you. One of the things that, changing the subject, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that there was this rumor that Matt Reeves was going to use another script a long time ago, and that that he was going to recast Ben Affleck, and that he was not going to include Deathstroke, and that he was going to change everything, blah. However, that hasn't been mentioned. The only thing that Matt Reeves has stated again and again is that they're going with a new story, focusing on detective. What does that mean? Well, if you've seen Blade Runner, there are various versions of Blade Runner. One is quite different than the other. The one that is very significantly different is the one with voiceover and narration that makes it sound like it's a detective noir story. It has a bunch of Harrison Ford narrating what's going on, and it feels very noir. I believe Guillermo del Toro loves this version. Basically has Deckard, being the Blade Runner, talking about, it was a very dark night that night, and I didn't know what to do, and blah, 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 blah. You had the really cool noir voiceover. That's not my favorite. But again, it's quite different, and it had a different ending than the original Blade Runner, that was seen in the movies, in the theaters, in the cinema. The one that I seem to enjoy, why not? It's the director's cut and the final cut. If that's the version that Ridley Scott seems to have in store for us, then that's the version I'm gonna go with. And that one's quite different. You can even see some of the eyes in Harrison Ford kind of shine, giving you kind of a hint that he might be a replicant. So that's a completely different movie than the one in cinemas, and it's the completely different that, the one with narration and alternative scenes and stuff like that. So what does that mean for Matt Reeves? Well, if you looked at what was said from Chris Terrio, Ben Affleck, and Jeff Johns, and all the legitimate people from DC and Warner Brothers, is that the previous script was amazing. Everybody loved it, and they were really happy with it. High praise. And when, Matt Reeves says that, this is a new story and we're going to make it a detective-based, this is my take. The previous script was very influenced by Arkham. If you read many of the outlets, that's what it was stated, but it was meant to be the ultimate Batman movie. Not a trilogy, not part of a whole universe. It was meant to be if Ben Affleck gets one shot at Batman, writing, directing, producing, starring in it, this is the movie that he would be happy with. Clearly, he's dealing with, alcoholism, as he admitted. He's also trying to get his normal life back together. He's trying to be there for his kids. Also, it was too much of a hassle for Fly By Night, or Drive By Night, the previous movie where he did many roles as producer, director, writer, and actor. So what I gather is that he wanted one project, and instead he sought out a partner, a producing partner, directing partner, a writing partner, who wants more out of the material because Matt Reeves is a fan. So what that probably means is that Matt Reeves is looking at a trilogy. He's not going to just spend years of his life doing something he doesn't really care about. And he's probably going to take this one script, borrow elements, and stretch it over 3 movies, giving him plenty of time to, stretch his directorial legs. He might direct the first Batman movie, he might produce the second, he might come back to direct the third one, or he might produce the next two or direct all three. If he's going to be changing Batman tonality from a detective story, a vengeance story, and a horror movie, I don't know, with Scarecrow or the Joker or Riddler, you can definitely make different Batman movies. So the possibilities are endless, and it leaves more room for the DC cinematic universe. So I'm not really worried. If you remember The Dark Knight by Chris Nolan, there were going to be two movies that were, that became that movie. Two-Face was just going to be scarred at the end of that movie, and the third film was going to focus on Two-Face. Obviously, that didn't happen, and Two-Face was combined into The Dark Knight, and then the after effect of the White Knight of Gotham was brought in by Bane, and the deception by Gary Oldman's Commissioner Gordon. So it became, quite different, and I'm quite happy with that. And that's what good directors do. They kind of look at the material and be like, okay, this is what I can do, this is what I can bring. I'm going to borrow elements from all these elements, from all these other properties and stuff like that. One of the coolest things is that Deathstroke, apparently, he's still in the DC universe, so we might see him in the Batman movie as well as other films. I wouldn't mind seeing him in Suicide Squad 2 as the main villain, because I want to see my fight of Deathstroke versus Deadshot. But yeah, there's plenty of possibilities for Batman by Matt Reeves. So that's another cool thing in the news. All right, moving on to another topic. Wonder Woman is still going pretty strong in the box office. It is about 380 domestic and 764 worldwide. It is one of the slowest decreasing superhero movies. In the United States, it means that people are still watching it, people are still going to see it, and in the age of spoilers and haterade and complacency, it's really nice that people are still going to see Wonder Woman. And I think that the reason is that it's a movement. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The media is against DC Comics when you have to make movie history to get good reviews and make a historic movie like Wonder Woman, which I've said in terms of quality is comparable to the first Spider-Man by Sam Raimi, and also comparable to Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. But as in terms of social and pop culture relevance, it's definitely like Richard Donner's first Superman, because this is the first woman that made us believe that women can fly and kick ass and do all of the awesome things that they can do. So I'm really happy that Wonder Woman is going strong, and I'm still saving money to buy the statue of Wonder Woman from the Justice League. That's going to be a pretty penny, because they're $150 each, and I have to buy one of each. So that's really nice. Next topic, speaking of continuing the box office, is that the third and final conclusion of Planet of the Apes is actually number one right now, and it overtook the amazing. Well, that's not amazing anymore. It took over Spider-Man. Spiderman Homecoming, and somebody posted something on Facebook, and I replied, and then somebody replied something, and I don't know how we got started, but somehow give the rights back to Sony was starting to trend on my social groups. Thank you. It's not that brilliant to say it, really, but it does seem like a lot of people are not knocked out of the ballpark with a new Spider-Man movie. It leaves a lot of movie people, wanting for more. I haven't seen it. I don't want to see it. I don't care to see it. In order to get my hype over it, me and my girlfriend sat down and watched the Sam Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man, and even the latest one, 3, the last one, even though she didn't quite like it, it had some amazing scenes in there. The creation of the Sandman, with a beautiful soundtrack by Danny Elfman, was really poetic. Kind of quite beautiful. And also the cringeworthy jazz Spider-Man scene of Peter Parker. It's cringe to watch, but it shows courage in Sam Raimi. Other scenes that actually do stand out. It's like Aunt May telling the scene of how Uncle Ben proposed. That's beautiful. The scene of Sandman coming into his apartment building and telling his family he's not a bad guy. He's just someone that has bad luck. Beautiful. The black and white shots of flashbacks of the night Uncle Ben was murdered. That was beautiful. And of course, I found that, this movie did have a heart. But, Sony wanted to shoehorn Venom in there, and we all know what happened. But even then, it shows that, Matt Reeves had some balls, but nothing really quite is as beautiful and strong as the second Spider-Man movie. I mean, raindrops falling on my head. I mean, I thought they were mocking another movie. I thought that it was, there was some, Grace Kelly 1950s song or some obscure movie that they were referencing with that. And I didn't realize at that time that is an original, created, beautiful cinematic piece of art. Like Gene Kelly, Singing in the Rain. I mean, yeah, I do go on to say that the second Sam Raimi has that scene, that cinematic scene that me and other as film students are going to be able to quote many, many years from now. Now, this really cool person or a website that I follow on Twitter called The Flightcast, big shout out to them. They retweeted somebody named Guru, and I don't know if Guru is the one responsible for this review of Spiderman Homecoming, but it does share some of my sentiments. So I'll go ahead and read this to you. It shares my sentiments regarding the Marvel movies. Okay, here goes. This is what the reviewer said. I don't know if it's Guru himself, but this is what it says. The truth is that there shouldn't be disappointment. I should by no means feel disappointed. But leaving the theater, I was confronted with this completely overwhelming feeling of utter tiredness and sadness. After seeing the movie, I was messaging one of my friends who asked why it's so poor and why I disliked it so much, and my exact words were, "It's more MCU garbage, but this time, it's Spider-Man, and it feels fucking personal," end quote. It continues on to this big fat 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, the incredibly positive consensus on social media. It just proves that Marvel has won. They've won over everyone, critics and audiences alike, with their openly corporatized, overly produced pieces of modern era junk. It proves that, for the time being, good creative films have lost, stuck in a sea of big budget, corporatized products, which seek to homogenize other money-making properties in an endless pursuit of more, and more money and less, and less artistic freedom. There's no feeling I like less as a film watcher than coming out hating a movie, especially a movie featuring a character I kind of most definitely really enjoy. But I didn't just leave the theater hating Spiderman Homecoming. I came out disgusted with the current film environment, angry at those who allow movies like this to get made. Spider-Man Homecoming is nothing but another long line of process-paneled, audience-tested products designed to put out a story and character ahead of form and thematics. It is clear from the very first image exactly what this movie is going to be. A wide shot of Avengers Tower over the skyline of New York City. This isn't the New York of Sam Raimi's trilogy, a seemingly endless city of verve and excitement, where the citizens are passionate about their home and Spider-Man, the icon of the people. No, this is the New York of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, a place where in-jokes and Easter egg references are leaned on far more heavily than genuine emotion and well-developed characters. When the film culminates in a scene at the all-gray, completely concrete Avengers home base, dominated by garish CGI, it's obvious just how much of a cash grab this film is. There isn't a single good image or set piece or edit or memorable moment throughout the course of the whole picture. There are jokes, but not enough drama to balance out the jokes, leaving the whole affair feeling lifeless and pastiche. The film is a joke. It's a joke which has all of Hollywood buying into it, not catching onto its comedy, because if Homecoming is anything, it's a huge cry to end this thing now. Purge it, destroy it all, burn it to the ground, rebuild it, give it to the directors, give it to the creatives. Don't allow the producers to choke all life and passion out of these films in an attempt to make money. But, sadly, there are very few people getting the joke right now, and it looks like things are only gonna get worse. The wheel is only going to get larger, leaving movie-making actors, creatives, stumbling and reeling in its wake. Yeah, with wow. Damn, I needed a drink of water after that. Yeah, dude, that was oh man, that was a very dire and direct comment. And yeah, I think that's the problem that me and other people share with Marvel movies. I'm not saying that DC makes PhD movies for thesis and Kubrick-esque kind of, but they do try and they do aim for something different and something of quality. For instance, me as a fan of Smallville, X-Files, Star Trek, even Game of Thrones tonight. It's the new premiere of season 7. There are some episodes of those TV shows where I'm kind of like, oh man, they should have tried a little bit longer. They're just doing filler, But that's television. Television's usually, it wasn't very big budgetly produced up until Twin Peaks in the 90s. We took what we could. We couldn't get a CGI Hulk back in the day. We got Lou Ferrigno, but that was good enough, man. They had to come up with a really good idea, for the scripts to kind of work around their limitations. Nowadays, people are lazy, and even Disney is lazy. They can do like CGI frost giants on, they're, Cinderella TV shows, but they can't do the Hulk on Shield. Come on, man, that's ridiculous. And I think that, like we said in the intro, I don't want to bash it. I don't want to bash Marvel, but I don't contribute money to them anymore. And I think that one of the reasons why people feel this way is because they're seeing what the competition is doing. Even Hellboy, who's not Marvel or DC, had a very strong Guillermo del Toro influence. Persepolis had a very, Marjan influence. She was allowed to do whatever she wanted in there. Valerian, that is based on a European comic. They're doing whatever the hell they want, If people are like, hey, are you going to change the spaceship because it looks kind of like the Millennium Falcon? No, they're not going to change that because the comics came before the Millennium freaking Falcon. They're doing what they want, and they're doing justice to the comics. And I think that takes balls, And I think that, I think that it's beautiful that, there's a lot of variety in comics, but I don't want to see them get stagnant. And there is some BS favoritism by the media because they don't. I feel that because DC Comics tries to, be a little smart, the American attitude is like, well, screw you, buddy. Can't tell me what to do. And, they're just kind of like, I'm going to look for plot holes. Whereas if you have something dumb with the lowest common denominator, the audience goes, I didn't have to think. I like that. It made me laugh. And, of course, I'm doing that kind of weird accent because it sounds like Goofy. Not a diss on the South. It's just more a diss on Goofy because it's freaking Goofy. So yeah, I think that is the problem, is that anything that is deemed too brainy, it's not cool. But if it's dumb and funny, people are like, oh, well, that didn't insult my intelligence. Well, that's because it didn't even touch upon your intelligence. And I think that that's kind of sad. And that review of Spider-Man was pretty spot on how I feel about Marvel. And their comics now, they're doing a Hulk with adamantium claws like Wolverine. I'm just like, but I digress. So big shout out to Guru on Twitter. I hope you don't get any hate mail. And if you do, I hope that the media and Twitter police call out haters against you and fellow DC fans like they're calling out whenever the Marvel guys get hated on. So let's continue with this show, and let's continue with the love. Speaking of love, Christopher Nolan was in the news. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a awesome premiere of the new film Dunkirk over at Warner Brothers YouTube channel. It featured a bunch of screaming girls, because I guess one of the kids from One Direction was there. I didn't even know who that person is. My sister had to tell me this. But it was cool. They had some pretty cool interviews with the cast and crew. I saw Prince Harry was there with a veteran of the UK Armed Forces and the CEO of Britain and Spain and Europe, Warner Brothers, I think. And they had a nice, meet and greet with everybody. Tom Hardy was really respectful. Everybody was really respectful to this veteran. And, Prince Harry. And, they had a nice chat with Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas, who seemed like a nice people. I would definitely let my kids be babysit by them. That's how nice they seem. I don't think, a kid's going to come back with bruises or anything. But anyways, I have to give him a big shout out because he refused to do interviews by internet so-called movie critics. He was like, no. And that was great. I applaud him for that. But the reason why he was in the news is because he actually loves Wonder Woman and keeps up with the DC movies, DC EU. One of the coolest things is that he didn't give in to the clickbait websites. He didn't say, I love Wonder Woman the most, and the others suck. He didn't give them any clickbait to leech off. He says that he keeps up with the DC movies and he loves Wonder Woman, which is the latest one. And that's all he said. Pretty straightforward. It's kind of amazing. And I think that we need more filmmakers like him actually respecting the DC movie universe. Quite simply because, in a in an alternate world, Christopher Nolan would be a slave to comic book movies. His brother, the other Nolan, would be making the Batman trilogy with Ben Affleck right now. Emma Thomas would be making Wonder Woman 2. It's and things like that. If they loved money, they would have stayed there. But they love, obviously, they love DC properties because they're still executive producing several. And they also love privacy, and they love good cinema. Dunkirk utilized real airplanes and real ships. I can't wait to see it, but it's getting positive, word of mouth, which is what I care about, not critics or box office. People who actually enjoy films really seem to be liking it. So, hey, more power to them. And the last bit of news is actually pretty damn adorable and pretty damn cute. I never thought I'd say this, but Walmart. Walmart has some really cool Justice League themed commercials. My family was watching some kind of Mexican soap opera, some telenovela, and they had this commercial. I went to the kitchen to grab something to eat, and I was like, oh, hey, what's this? And I was like, oh, this is a cool commercial. And lo and behold, log on to Facebook an hour or two later, and it's on our social media. All of my DC groups are talking about it. They're raving about it. They're like, oh my god, this is so cute. This is adorable. And, the next day, looks like a few websites picked it up, and moms everywhere were like, wow, this is adorable. This makes it, my kid does feel like a superhero while wearing a Superman, Wonder Woman, or Batman. So it is a very, very cute commercial. I am very happy that, I end the segment of the news with this because it's really cute. If you haven't gone and see it, I'll go ahead and leave a link for you guys. It's adorable, and let the Justice League commence. So for the review for Superheroes Decoded, the show is pretty cool. I think they tried to rush it to coincide with the release of Wonder Woman. I know it sounds, like, hey, maybe I should pander it and give it higher praises and reviews because, it probably helped Wonder Woman, and I'm a DC guy. However, I'm a truth kind of guy, and, one of the reasons why I do these kind of things is just I love the truth. Truthfully, the documentary is kind of shabby at some points. The biggest sin for this documentary is the fact that they attribute the Silver Age to Marvel. And this is not just this documentary's fault. A lot of people who don't know much about comic books do not really remember history. and they're very selective about who did who and what happened to when. So I am going to use my video camera and then overlay some samples. I do believe that every sample has to be shorter than like 28 seconds for the fair copyright use, since I'm not making any money. And I will overlay this documentary with another documentary called Secret Origin, the history of DC Comics, which I think highlights the Silver Age quite differently. And then if people think, well, because it's a DC documentary, it's probably biased and untrue, I will have a quote from Stan Lee that you can easily find online that proves our point and how horribly edited this documentary was. Let us commence.
The promise of a new frontier stokes the public imagination, and it could be just what's needed to rescue the superhero from the brink of obscurity. In 1961, with Atlas sales struggling, Captain America artist Jack Kirby and editor Stan Lee decide to channel America's new fascination with science and space.
So there you have Kevin Conroy, Batman himself, narrating the documentary, and they attribute the wonderful space age Kennedy New Frontier attitude to the invention of the Silver Age, which by itself it's not very misleading, but they kind of give the birth of the Silver Age to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And now we're going to delve into what really happened.
Just 1 year after the code's implementation, sales plunged by 75%. DC needs a new strategy for the new times. It looks to reinvent itself in the Silver Age. Superheroes have been in an eclipse for almost a decade.
We had to come up with new ideas. Someone at the editorial meeting suggested, say, why don't we put out the Flash again?
Notice the focus on all the comics, and notice the focus of the code's implementation and the damage it had on comic book sales. Prior to that, the hearings on youth behavior and how that affected the sales of comics and the destruction of EC Comics was also talked in this documentary. It is much different portrayal than, hey, the Atomic Age happened, let's make the Atomic X-Men. Kind of seemed like what the other documentary implied.
Then, okay, that's a good idea. Who's going to edit the Flash? Everyone looked at me.
Julie Schwartz has been with DC since 1944.
I firmly believe there would not be a comic book business today if it were for Julie Schwartz. Julie is just one of those people without whom an industry would not have existed.
If you haven't heard of Julie Schwartz, that's the problem. A lot of people have heard of Walt Disney, yet he did not create Mickey Mouse. It was iWorks. Google it. And that's actually the problem that I see with a lot of people who are new to comics. They kind of go, well, Stan Lee, he's the guy who created comic books. He invented Superman. That's not true. Julie Schwartz is the person responsible for the Silver Age for comics.
The response to Flash was gangbusters. They did one issue, and it sold out. The Flash is successful. We revived one of our Golden Age characters. Hey, Julie, what else you got? And the Silver Age of comics was on.
Under Julie Schwartz, dozens of characters are reborn and given science fiction origins. And even more new heroes are created. Here comes Metal Men, Adam Strange, Metamorpho, Teen Titans, and the Challengers of the Unknown.
Notice the difference. Under Julie Schwartz, not by him. He supervised a lot of creative people, bringing Hawkman back, a new version of the Atom, and all these characters were under his guidance. It wasn't by him. It's not like he's taking credit for it. And regarding Challengers of the Unknown, they are quite similar to the Fantastic Four. Check out, there are some really awesome articles on Google on whether or not the Fantastic Four were a ripoff of Challengers of the Unknown, because they have similar personalities. Band of Four, a mishap happens, they get super, it's too frustrating to talk. But this is not about that. This is about integrity of the comics. So let's continue.
The heroes band together to fight, but not as the Justice Society.
I hate the word society. It sounds like a social club. I want to use a better word, league. There's baseball leagues, football leagues. Youngsters identify with leagues. Societies they know from nothing. And when that came out, boom, 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 rocketed into space.
Julie revived the characters, created the Silver Age of comics.
So once again, you guys hear it over here. He created the Silver Age of comics. If you don't believe me, believe the person talking right now. His name was Len Wein. He is the co-creator of Wolverine, creator of Swamp Thing for DC Comics, and he was also the editor for Watchmen, and kind of responsible for making Alan Moore geek out and be like, hey, come on over to the pond, across the pond to make Watchmen. So this guy's really reputable. So let us continue to the meat and potatoes.
His revival of the Justice League very directly led to the formation of Marvel Comics.
Marvel Comics publisher Martin Goodman and DC's Jack Leibowitz play golf together.
So Jack Leibowitz kept boasting to Martin Goodman, hey, we have a big hit on our hands.
Martin came back from the golf game, talked to Stan Lee, who was his editor, and said, DC's got this really good selling book called Justice something. You got to do something like that.
Now, how do you think the documentary that we're reviewing today covered it? Do you think they're going to give credit to DC Comics? Do you think they're going to give credit to the Justice League? Do you think they're going to get credit to Julie Schwartz? Ha!
My publisher said to me he'd like me to come up with a team of superheroes. And if I wanted to keep my job, I had to do it. I wanted the hero to be the world's greatest scientist. And I tried to make them real people, even though they're comic book superheroes. I called them the Fantastic Four.
And Stanley, the name of the guy, puts out a magazine called The Fantastic Four. It proved to be a big hit. So in a sense, I not only saved DC Comics, I saved Marvel Comics too.
And just in case you don't believe what your eyes are seeing, and in case you don't believe what your ears are hearing, let's hear from the man himself, Stan Lee, before all this mumbo-jumbo somehow erased people's brains.
He had found out that our competitor, DC Comics, which called itself National Comics in those days, they had done a book called the Justice League of America, a group of superheroes, and it was selling very well. And he said to me, Stan, why don't you do a book about a group of superheroes? So I figured this is my chance to do it my way. So I came up with something I called the Fantastic Four.
What kind of documentary leaves such an important information from one of the most crucial times in comic book history? I'll tell you one, a biased one. So, do I recommend this, documentary? I kind of do. Unless you don't want to think, unless you don't want to research, you're probably going to end up having, a misrepresentation, misunderstanding of what the actual comic book history is. This is just one bad example. I mean, that they really, really screwed up on this documentary. So it always pays for you to pay attention. You have to be smart and think and remember how things are. Because it seems that a lot of movie critics are doing the same, history revisionist BS that I witnessed while, this documentary was playing. A lot of people do mind tricks and they remember things differently. You know, they want to whitewash history, you know, and not remember what really, really happened. So Silver Age is essential to American comics, and Julie Schwartz is responsible for that, along with DC Comics and all the wonderful creators of the 60s. So do I recommend it? Yeah, sure, but be smart about it and do your own damn research. Don't let them preach you. I'll probably give this documentary like a C minus. Yeah, but it's kind of disturbing. It's the same trend that I see on the movie reviews, kind of skewed because they don't think. Okay, regarding the Hulu original documentary Batman and Bill, you know, a lot of people recommended this because I'm a big Batman fan. I started, my journey into comics with Batman as my first Caped Crusader. I mean, I did read Archie and El Santo and stuff like that. But, you know, this is the Anglo-American comics. However, people were like, you should see this. This is really great. This is how, Batman got this 2 creators credits on it. And they really hyped it up. So I went really positive into this documentary until until I watched it. And I think that this piece should not have been a documentary. I think 60 Minutes would have done this much justice with like 7 minutes in their Sunday programming for the mass media to recognize Bill Finger. What we have here is a very unusual documentary that is mostly about the author who dug up this story, who obsessed for 10 years. We get to see the inside of his house. We get to see his family even being interviewed. I don't give a about that. I care about Bill Finger and Batman. We get very little, in essence, of this. We do get some interviews by some, high quality people, but it's very nitpicky. And the problem with this is that the guy spent like 10 years researching this, and his premise was basically fuck you, Bob Kane. And I'm sorry, but that's not allowed. You can't uncover the truth of Bill Finger while simultaneously giving Bob Kane the middle finger. That's what the documentary should be called. Giving Bob Kane the middle Bill Finger. Yeah, I mean, look at this picture from the screen cap. There is a whole scene where this gentleman just talks shit about Bob Kane while the man has been dead. Like, what kind of evil fucking person disses someone's grave? I mean, seriously, like, what? You don't do research on Batman and do some fucked up shit like that, you know? And it's really ridiculous. Like, you can't... That was really infuriating, actually. And it's very, very disheartening. Even I'm going to show you what I think is the most important parts of this doc.
Being an attorney, I was able to assess what resources we had and didn't have. So she contacted me because she was seeking a copyright attorney to help her with the situation. And the copyright law says that when 2 people create parts of something that are intended to be merged into an inseparable work, then it's a joint work.
So we're hearing from the sister of the descendant of Bill Finger, and the sister being an attorney, she had to contact a copyright lawyer. And that's what we're hearing over here.
Somebody's simply claiming that they are the sole author when they're not. That doesn't really do it. So then you look at, what did Bill Finger contribute? Did that make him a joint author or joint owner of the work?
So here we have a very, very clear distinction that we need more proof of who created what. I mean, the Walking Dead creators had a fallout of a long-term friendship because, clearly both of them are creative, but it was very unspecified who created what. And when the show was made into the movie, it was a big argument, and luckily they were able to get their lives back together. But this is something that a lot of comic book people go through. You need to be very specific on who created who and who created what part of everything. And just saying that, well, Bob Kane was grandiose and he made stuff up, and that's not proof. We need tangible proof. You can't just say, well, all the cool parts about Batman, that was Bill Kane, or you can't say like, oh, the cool parts was Bill Finger. No, you kind of need proof.
Bob Kane, eventually kind of helped by talking about Bill's contribution himself.
Bill was in on 70 to 75%.
And that was very important. If poor Cena had to start with that threshold issue, that just would have been really, really difficult.
So there you have it, folks. That's the proof you needed. Bob Kane, in his later years, admitting to 50 to 75% of contribution on Batman by Bill Finger. Case closed. That's all you need. Now, did the filmmaker give any thanks to Bob Kane? Absolutely not. Did the filmmaker give any thanks to Warner Brothers for letting him use, comic books or clips from movies or, no. There was no thanks at the end credits whatsoever to either Bob Kane family, Warner Brothers, or DC Comics. And, in the press, what we call this is a hit job. Somebody just wanting to talk shit about DC Comics. This particular author, I worked on Borders books for 4 years. I worked at Barnes & Noble 2.5, possibly 3 after that. So I have never heard of this author of kids' books. He certainly he has made a name of himself by bashing DC Comics with Joe Siegel and Joe Shuster first, and now Bill Finger. And quite frankly, this documentary is over-glamorizing himself, the author, and not Bill Finger. And I think it's a horrible, horrible thing to do. That's why, all these little clips, that's all you needed to see. It should have just been like 60 Minutes, or some reputable source, like that. I don't recommend you watch this. It is really cool that, Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman was the first film to have Bill Finger's name as contributor to the creation of Batman. That is pretty cool. What's not very cool, it's the documentary's creator just being a total dick to the other creator. Now, the coolest part was hearing Bill Finger's voice. That was amazing. I got goosebumps. I got really happy. That was great. And I'm going to play you a little clip. And if this author of this documentary and this book had any integrity, this is the image of Jack Kirby comes to mind. So listen to Bill Finger talk about how things used to be back then, and tell me whether or not Jack Kirby deserves his own justice. Jack Kirby deserves to be named more than just, Stan Lee's lackey.
You have to be able to break down the panels. in such a way that it's interesting. Also, you have to describe this to the artist. You've got to kind of goose him along a bit, and you've got to explain to him the kind of angles you want, that sort of thing. And this is very important in comic book writing.
And the last documentary on the podcast to be reviewed is The Death of Superman Lives. What happened? ? The reason why I want to, finish our, documentary trilogy with this one is because this individual who made this particular doc has now joined Collider as a regular. I'm not sure if he's replacing John Campea or whatever, but, I expect more anti-DC comics and anti-DC movie bashing from him, since that's what the trend of Collider seems to do, or it might be turning the page. This particular documentary is a good example of, I guess you can call it journalistic integrity. Obviously the filmmaker was really passionate about this project, and it shows. All the people being interviewed are ridiculously talented. And their awesome passion, it's shown. You can see all the craftsmen, the artists, the set designers, the producers, the writers. Everybody seems to be really, really into this movie. And, if it was going to be meant to be a hit piece, it was not it, because everybody brought so much charm, so much passion to the project. The best part was seeing Tim Burton himself talk about this film. So as far as well managed, put together, it is surprisingly good, because when I first heard about it and when you started to see some of the previews on YouTube and stuff like that, it did look very half-assed and cheap. And I'm very surprised that the journalistic integrity is top-notch. So I highly recommend it. Especially, there is this wonderful, I wouldn't say it's a drinking game because you might die, but the the film director bobbles his head way too freaking much. I managed to capture some of those head bobbling, and as you can see, it's kind of hypnotic, and it's just too funny. It's distracting too. That's probably the only negative. And then there's water drinking and stuff like that. I'm just like, okay, that's how it's gonna be. So it's not so much of a diss of the material, but there seems to be some enjoyment here. I highly recommend it. And there's some really cool clips you should check out. And then we're going to move on to the comics, The Button. Alright, so we're going to get into The Button issues and what it means for DC Comics continuity. This is a little bit tricky because there will be a lot of spoilers. As I mentioned before, I reread the Before Watchmen, featuring Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias, Adrian Veidt. And one of the key things that I discovered in those prequel comics is that young Adrian Veidt, or Ozymandias, prior to being Ozymandias, he was really calculating, clever, and manipulative. Now, I think that we are going to get into some heavy spoiler stuff. At the end of The Button, when you see, Thomas Wayne, the alternate version of Batman from Flashpoint, with the red logo, there's a panel there that says, "Don't be Batman. Find happiness, please. You don't have to do this. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for your mother. Be a father for your son in a way that I could never be for you. Let the Batman die with me." That seems to be the kind of manipulation that young Adrian Veidt did in the prequel comics before Watchmen. He was a young, manipulative little person. Sure, you saw that in the Watchmen comic book for Evil Deeds, but and before Watchmen, you kind of get to see that he did it for good deeds as well. I think that by making Batman doubt and planting the seed two things can happen. Of course, Batman is not gonna quit being Batman. But even if that seed of doubt is in there, when age approaches, he might decide to let Damian Wayne be Batman and Bruce Wayne can run for office or something ridiculous like that, might benefit Adrian Veidt and Dr. Manhattan as far as, chess pieces are concerned. Because that way, if Batman becomes like the mayor of Gotham, kind of like Oliver Queen, he won't necessarily quit. He won't necessarily stop being Batman, but he might be happier not putting himself in the line and letting his younger son take the risk, knowing that there are Lazarus pits everywhere, that Damian has trained harder and from younger years than him. Damian has the Bat family to protect them. So even the hint of a happier possibility, it's still intriguing. It's still awesome. It's still Batman. And that's the wonderful thing about Adrian Veidt in the Before Watchmen, when you watch him ascend to that iconic character that we know at Watchmen. So that's a pretty cool connection that I made. And obviously, once you start, seeing how Dr. Manhattan at the end of Watchmen graphic novel, goes, I might create new life. And then you kind of see a blue glow when the Reverse Flash is being destroyed. In the Button issue, you kind of go that in order to create life, sometimes, evil has to be destroyed. Kind of like the Reverse Flash, which might hinder Dr. Manhattan's plan. Again, I think that making Dr. Manhattan and Adrian Veidt, kind of like the bad guys in this Button issue, it's really interesting. But I think both of their motives are going to turn out to be good and for the better, which might necessarily, for them anyways, which might not necessarily equal to good in the DC universe, which is amazing and brilliant again. I think that, Adrian Veidt and Dr. Manhattan are going to try to do good. But if you read the other Jeff Johns classic masterpiece, in my opinion, Identity Crisis, you get to see a young, Superboy break reality because of this. He wants to go back to the way things were. He wants to make these heroes do good and be funny and hopeful and just without encountering, reality, and without having them, be messy and sometimes fail and stuff like that. So yeah, you are gonna see a lot of that, and I will go ahead and do a much more thorough explanation of not only Watchmen but Before Watchmen, and as the Watchmen joined a DC universe, which I think we're gonna get a sneak peek this weekend at Comic-Con. So it's a very, very exciting times for us. Alright guys, this is my podcast. Sorry it's kind of lengthy, but I like to give you guys pretty good material. Alright, say yes to DC, dile sí a DC. Gracias.